At the beginning of this month, the Collection Chamber celebrated its 6th birthday, with this channel taking up the last year of that. And because of this, I've been looking back at the whole site and found that I've reviewed over 470 classic and not so classic games, getting each one to run on modern Windows. I surprise myself sometimes, so let's keep that number rising by adding March's selection to that list. First up is Ringworld, Revenge of the Patriarch. Based on the novels by Larry Niven, this sci-fi point-and-click adventure has a great pedigree behind it. One look at the inventive worlds and great pixel art on display, and surely that would make for a classic, right? In all honesty, Tsunami Media's first foray telling tales from the known space has very little game in there. The writing is decent, but there's no voice acting despite a CD-ROM re-release a few years later. The adventure you go on, while filled with interesting species, settings and societies, are essentially fetch quests. A two-headed, three-limbed patriarch contacts you, bluntly demanding you collect cube-like MacGuffins found on a structure that circles the sun called the Ring. So, you head down to meet alien tribes, vicious cannibals, talking bats, and you even get to visit an underwater kingdom. The sights are something to behold. It's a shame you can't do much in them. Even in the arcade sequences, such as a jaunt through a dangerous sunfield, have surprisingly little to them. When you do get to twiddle with things, the controls are your basic point-and-click adventure fare. Right-click opens up a menu where all of the relevant icons are found, including talk, look, interact, and access to the game options menu. It can be a little frustrating, as other than the look function, your icon will default back to walk after every click. This makes pixel hunting much more tiresome than it normally is. Some hotspots are particularly obtuse, even when you know what to do. I had trouble exiting the village of the Canyon people because I was required to click on a rock on the very edge of the screen, not the area above it, which makes the most sense. That being said, the look of the many worlds and alien species kept me playing till the end, and I can't say it's a total dud, but it's not all I wanted it to be. I really wanted to like Ringworld much more than I actually did. It's a disappointingly below average game that I half-heartedly recommend adventure game fans give it a try, for the artwork at the very least. If that seemed a little too unsexy for you, you'd best spend some time with the leather Goddesses of Phobos. I played through both of Infocom's classic sleaze fests, and thoroughly enjoyed both of them. The first game is part of Infocom's classic interactive fiction lineup. It's a text adventure crammed with laugh-out-loud humour in every innuendo-filled sentence. It does suffer from what I call psychic designer syndrome, where you have to guess the designer's intention instead of solving a puzzle logically, but I found less of that here. In fact, I found it to be quite easy at the beginning, which helped me a great deal investing me in the game. The sequel, entitled Gas Pump Girls Meet the Pulsating Inconvenience from Planet X, is more of a traditional adventure game. You can choose to play as either Lydia, Zeke, or an alien named Barth as you explore a small town from the 50s. This setting is brimming with every Americana trope you can think of.
I finally got that pro-business hose out of the General's engine, but I still haven't been able to get that darn Beegis valve out.
Much like the first game, there's a lot of titillation going on. And I mean double D-sized titillation. Neither game crosses the line into pornographic, meaning it's more carry-on than turn-on, and both have equal opportunity objectification, depending on which sex you choose at the game's start.
By the way, we sell rubbers here if you're worried.
Baby, you were great. Even better than my old squaw. Tongue like 100 mountain goats.
Even so, it's still an adventure for mature audiences only, which is why I was surprised to find how insanely easy the whole thing is. Most of the game revolves around a scavenger hunt, to feed or heal a wounded Barth, or fix his spaceship with arbitrary items. The writing is still very funny, and is the single reason why I played through it 3 times, once with each character. and it is commendable that everyone you meet is actually voice acted. There is no CD-ROM release of this, so all the speech is compressed and scratchy to fit on the 17 floppies of the original release. They're still audible and understandable, and acted with vigour and gusto, so it's very much worth it. This sequel is not as good as the first, but both are very fun, if brief, adventures.
What a great effect! It looks so real!
If you want a little more action in your adventure, don't forget I made Draken Order of the Flame playable again at the beginning of the month. It has you play as a dragon rider, as she takes revenge on an orc army, with the help of a fire-breathing dragon.
Let's go roast some.
This is a fun, ambitious Tomb Raider clone with some great ideas, just about limited by the technology of the time. It's well worth a play, so check out the standalone video for my full thoughts. Dylan Dog is a vastly underrated comic book series that began in the 80s, and it mostly stayed in its native Italy. It still runs off and on to this day, and Dark Horse brought a small selection to the American market in the late 90s. Most of the English-speaking world will know about the series through the movies. Della Morte Della More, or Cemetery Man starring Rupert Everett, takes place within the universe, while the underrated Dylan Dog Dead of Night starring Brandon Routh is a more Hollywood take on the franchise. Out of all the media surrounding the horror-infused comic, the most obscure are the computer games. Developed by Simulmondo, they were a series of episodic cinematic platformers, each sold with a related issue of the comic on the newsstand. None of them left their native Italy except for this more substantial outing, a full release called The Murderers. You control Dylan as he explores a dusty mansion occupied by possessed aristocrats. The story is slim, and the puzzles are a little obtuse. You can interact with some switches in the background, but not others. Even the combat is a little weird, as I had trouble positioning Dylan to get off a good punch. Thankfully, this demon hunter is quite robust, with a generous life bar and a number of equipable weapons to find. Your inventory loadout is also a little cumbersome, as you have to pick up and select items using the menu rather than just walking over them. However, none of the negatives are quite enough to turn Dylan Dog into a, well, total dog. It's a slightly above average romp with a gothic vibe and obvious budgetary limits. Next up is a game I briefly spoke about in my last video, Pinky and the Brain World Conquest. Released in 1998 by South Peak Interactive, this arcade puzzler has you claiming squares in a maze by running over them. That is easier said than done, considering the fiendishly placed walls, traps and power-ups that scatter the field. The puzzles themselves are quite entertaining, if a little on the easy side, but the biggest annoyance is the strict time limit. Even in the early stages, it gives you no room to experiment with solving the task at hand, and when you have power-ups that require trial and error to figure out their purpose, it comes off as unfair. You'll fail far more often than you will succeed.
Luckily, I'm kind of used to this.
There is a fun multiplayer mode too, which unfortunately is no longer online, but the AI opponents do give you a run for your money. This strips away the puzzle elements and has you claim more squares than your opponent before the time runs out. It reminds me of the chaos in Splatoon, and in a good way too, but the limited functionality this one has thanks to its age marks it down a little. A good, unimposing game for those imposing maniacal mice.
I want to go for the car. I want to risk it all for the car.
Maximum Roadkill.
To get your competitive blood pumping, there's Maximum Roadkill, or Maximum Road Rage if you live in Blighty. This is an obscure, fast-paced racing game released in 1996 that seemed to have been heavily inspired by Mega Race. complete with pre-rendered video representing each track. I found very little about this game online, with none of the usual sites like MobyGames or GameFAQs even having it listed. Not even the gaming magazines of the era thought to give it a couple of sentences for a review. Surprised considering it was published by Take-Two Interactive and seemed to have a relatively wide distribution. When you play the thing, you are left very underwhelmed. It is almost impossible to control your ship, let alone rank in the tournament. You do earn cash after each race with which you can upgrade your vehicle. This ends up being necessary if you want to get anywhere. When you're forced to lose multiple times before you're fast enough to get to the second cup, you know you're in for a slog. Even cheating by typing money in the chop shop, maxing out my machine before the first race didn't help. I still ran out of ammo and nitro after the first of the 5 laps, placing me last far more often than not. There are apparently 10 tracks over a number of cups, but I only managed to get to the second once, and that was a fluke. There are much better and more balanced racing games out there, including any entry in the Mega Race series, which you can find on GOG, so stay clear of this one. Lastly, there's Zargon from Epic MegaGames, one of the shareware platformers that got it mostly right. Few platforms for the PC could hold such a distinction, but when you have the Jill of the Jungle engine to work from, you do have a good head start, and can find those free on GOG if you wanted to. You play as Malvinius Havisham, who's been trapped in a fantasy world in turmoil thanks to an evil ruler named Zargon. It's typical shareware guff. Malvinius controls rather well, with a tight and predictable jumping arc, which you can change mid-air. Your main attack is a laser gun, but you can get better ones by collecting power-ups along the way, or buy them at any time if you have enough emeralds in your pocket. The levels, chosen by a cool looking overworld map, have you hunt down keys before finding the exit. Sometimes the enemy placement gets a little frustrating, and the slowdown can get to be a bit much at times, but they never hinder the game in any major way. Even with a number of branching paths and doorways, the levels are quite small. That being said, there's still a lot of game here, with around 40 levels shared between the 3 chapters. It won't compete with anything the consoles were doing at the time, but overall it's a very decent action platformer for a system that has very few of them. So that's it for this month. If you want to find out how you can play any of these for yourself, check out the Collection Chamber website, link in the description below. If you like what I do, please like, share and subscribe, and consider joining my Patreon if you're able to. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time on the Collection Chamber.